Business partner abandons millionaire with a 649 millimeters loss. Then a poor 6-year-old girl makes a proposal that breaks his heart. Before we tell this moving tale of sadness and solitude, share where you're watching from and subscribe for more touching stories. The crystal wine glass shattered against the marble floor of Richard Sterling's penthouse office, red wine spreading like blood across the pristine white stone. The 42-inch screen displayed numbers that made his stomach churn. Sterling Tech Enterprises. Loss. $649,000. His business partner of 8 years, Marcus Webb, had vanished overnight, taking with him not just money, but the revolutionary AI algorithm that was supposed to launch next month and secure their position as industry leaders for the next decade. "How could I have been so blind?" Richard whispered, his 36-year-old hands trembling as he loosened his Italian silk tie. The man he'd trusted with everything had systematically drained their accounts, sold their patents to competitors, and disappeared like smoke into the digital ether. 8 years of friendship, countless late nights building their empire from a garage startup to a billion-dollar tech giant, all destroyed in one calculated betrayal that had been months, possibly years, in the making. The boardroom door burst open, and his assistant Jennifer rushed in, her usually perfect composure completely shattered. Her blonde hair was disheveled, her designer suit wrinkled from stress, and her eyes red from what Richard suspected were tears shed in private. "Mr. Sterling." The phones haven't stopped ringing for 3 hours straight. CNN, Forbes, TechCrunch, The Wall Street Journal. They all want exclusive statements. The FBI Cybercrime Division is demanding an immediate meeting. The SEC has opened a formal investigation, and the board of directors has called an emergency session for 8 a.m. tomorrow morning. Richard slumped into his leather chair, the weight of the disaster crushing down on him like a physical force. The city lights of Seattle twinkled 40 floors below, each one representing people whose lives might be affected by his company's collapse. "Tell them, I need 24 hours to process this. Cancel everything else on my calendar. Meetings, conferences, the product launch presentation. Everything." He looked at the framed photograph on his mahogany desk. Him and Marcus at last year's tech conference in San Francisco. Both smiling confidently, both wearing matching Sterling Tech polo shirts, both believing they were building something that would change the world forever. The irony was suffocating. Marcus had been planning his betrayal even then, probably laughing internally at Richard's naive trust. His phone buzzed with a text from his lawyer, David Morrison. "Richard, this is worse than we initially thought." Marcus had administrative access to everything: the offshore development accounts, the emergency reserves, even the employee pension fund. "We need to meet immediately. The legal ramifications are staggering." Another buzz, this time from his accountant. "The preliminary audit shows systematic theft over 18 months. He's been draining accounts slowly, covering his tracks with fake invoices and fabricated expenses. This was premeditated on a level I've never seen." The rain outside matched his mood perfectly as he grabbed his coat from the executive closet. He couldn't face the suffocating walls of his crumbling empire anymore, couldn't bear the concerned looks from employees who might not have jobs next week, couldn't stomach the media vultures circling outside the building, waiting for his statement of defeat. The elevator descended 40 floors, each ding echoing his heartbeat, each floor taking him further from the life he'd built and closer to an uncertain future. In 12 hours, he'd gone from tech mogul billionaire to nearly bankrupt. The banks would call in their loans within days, the investors would file lawsuits within weeks, and everything he'd worked for since college would crumble into lawsuits and bankruptcy proceedings. As he stepped onto the dark Seattle street, Richard Sterling had no idea that his salvation was about to come from the most unexpected source imaginable. A 6-year-old girl who had been watching him far longer than he could have ever imagined, and whose connection to him ran deeper than blood. The Moonlight Bistro sat tucked between 2 towering buildings on Pine Street, its warm amber lights cutting through the November rain like a beacon of comfort in Richard's darkest hour. He'd been coming here religiously for 3 years, always alone, always ordering the same grilled salmon with dill sauce, always sitting at the corner table where he could think without interruption from fans, competitors, or journalists. Tonight felt monumentally different, possibly his last meal as a wealthy man. Certainly his last night before facing the public humiliation of his spectacular downfall. The restaurant was nearly empty at 9 p.m. on a Tuesday, with only a few couples sharing intimate dinners and one businessman frantically typing on his laptop while his food grew cold. The atmosphere was exactly what Richard needed, quiet, anonymous, and blissfully free from the chaos consuming his life. Miguel, the head waiter who'd served him for 3 years, approached with practiced sympathy etched across his weathered face. "The usual, Mr. Sterling, though I have to say, you look like you could use something considerably stronger than our house wine tonight. Perhaps our finest scotch? Just the salmon, Miguel, and make it a double whiskey instead of wine. The 18-year-old Macallan. I think I've earned it after the day I've had." Richard's laugh was hollow and bitter, echoing strangely in the nearly empty restaurant. The other patrons seemed to sense his mood, giving him a respectfully wide berth as news alerts about Sterling Tech's collapse continued buzzing on their smartphones. Miguel nodded sympathetically. "I saw the news, sir. For what it's worth, I'm sorry. You've always been kind to our staff here. Mr. Sterling." The voice was impossibly small, like a whisper carried on the November wind. He looked up to see a tiny figure standing beside his table, a little girl, maybe 6 years old, with enormous brown eyes that held an intelligence far beyond her tender years. Her dark hair was tangled and hadn't seen professional care in months, and her clothes were clearly donated items from a shelter. An oversized winter coat, jeans rolled up at the cuffs, sneakers with holes that let in the Seattle rain. But it was her eyes that stopped him cold, made his breath catch in his throat. There was something hauntingly, impossibly familiar about them, something that made his chest tighten with a recognition he couldn't quite place. She stood perfectly still despite the cold, studying him with the same analytical intensity he'd seen in mirrors during his most challenging business negotiations. "I'm sorry, sweetheart, but I think you have the wrong person," Richard said gently. Though his heart clenched painfully at her appearance, street children weren't uncommon in downtown Seattle, especially during the harsh winter months, but seeing one so young, so clearly intelligent despite her dire circumstances, always affected him more deeply than he cared to admit. The girl's eyes sparkled with a knowledge that seemed impossible for someone her age. "No, sir, you're definitely Richard Sterling, Chief Executive Officer of Sterling Tech Enterprises, born in Portland, Oregon, on March 15, 1988. Your favorite food is grilled salmon with dill sauce, and you always sit in this exact corner table when you're contemplating difficult problems. You've been coming here every Tuesday evening for 3 years, 2 months, and 16 days. You always tip Miguel exactly 25%. And you always order the Macallan when you're particularly stressed." Richard's fork froze halfway to his mouth, his whiskey forgotten on the white tablecloth. The precision of her knowledge was not just unsettling, it was almost supernatural in its accuracy. Every detail was correct, down to his tipping habits and stress-drinking preferences. "Who are you? How do you possibly know all that? Are you working for someone? A competitor, a journalist, the FBI?" The little girl reached into her oversized jacket with the careful movements of someone handling something precious beyond measure. She pulled out a small USB drive, the kind used for high-security data transfers, and placed it carefully on the white tablecloth between them, with the reverence of someone presenting a religious artifact. "My name is Emma, and I know who took your money, Mr. Sterling. I know exactly where every single dollar of your $649 million went. I know which accounts it's hidden in, and most importantly," she paused, her young face taking on an expression of absolute certainty, "I know exactly how to get every penny back." Emma's small fingers pushed the USB drive closer to Richard's untouched salmon, her movements deliberate and confident despite her apparent age and circumstances. The device seemed to glow under the restaurant's soft Edison bulb lighting, like a tiny technological beacon of hope in Richard's storm of despair and confusion. This USB drive contains everything you need to recover your $649 million, Mr. Sterling. Every single transaction Marcus Webb executed, every hidden offshore account he established, every digital footprint he thought he'd erased from existence. He's not nearly as clever as he believes himself to be. Richard stared at the child in complete disbelief, his analytical mind struggling to process what he was hearing from someone who couldn't possibly understand the complexities of international finance and cybercrime. That's impossible, Emma. Our security team spent 16 hours today trying to trace those transactions. These are some of the best cybersecurity experts in the entire country, people with decades of experience and access to FBI databases. The Federal Cybercrime Unit couldn't find any substantial leads. How could a little girl possibly succeed where trained professionals with unlimited resources failed? Emma's expression grew serious, her young face taking on the gravity and determination of someone far older and more experienced. She pulled out a small notebook from her coat pocket, its pages filled with meticulous handwriting, detailed diagrams, and what appeared to be complex mathematical equations. Because I've been watching Marcus Webb for 3 months, Mr. Sterling. Not just his public behavior or his business meetings, but his private digital habits, his security protocols, his personal patterns and psychological weaknesses. Adults consistently underestimate children. They think we're invisible, that we don't understand complex technological concepts. That assumption made me the perfect surveillance operative. She opened the notebook to a page covered with timestamps, locations, and behavioral observations. Every Tuesday at exactly 2:15 p.m., Marcus Webb sits by the large window at Starbucks across from your building on 4th Avenue. He thinks he's being security conscious, but he uses the same laptop every time, connects to the same VPN service, and follows identical digital pathways for all his covert activities. I've been systematically mapping his entire criminal network for weeks. Richard leaned forward, fascinated despite his deep skepticism. You've been conducting surveillance on my business partner? A 6-year-old girl conducting corporate espionage? When you're homeless, Mr. Sterling, you become exceptionally skilled at watching people without being noticed, Emma replied with the matter-of-fact tone of someone discussing weather patterns. And when you're obviously intelligent, but everyone assumes you're ignorant because of your appearance, you learn to use that misconception as a strategic advantage. Marcus Webb never once glanced at the dirty little girl sitting in the corner with library books and a juice box. The restaurant's soft jazz music seemed to fade into background silence as Richard studied the child's face more intently. There was something deeply, disturbingly familiar about her features, something that tugged at memories he couldn't quite access. The shape of her eyes, the determined set of her jaw, the way she tilted her head slightly when deep in thought. It all felt like looking into a mirror from his own childhood photographs. Emma, why would you help me? What do you want in return? And please don't tell me this is purely altruistic. Everyone wants something, especially when dealing with this amount of money. Emma's brave facade cracked slightly, revealing the scared, vulnerable little girl beneath her confident exterior. I want to go to school, Mr. Sterling. I've been living on the streets for 2 years, ever since my mum died from cancer. I'm smart. Really, really smart, but nobody cares about a homeless kid's potential. They see the dirty clothes and the matted hair and assume I'm just another street beggar looking for handouts. Her voice dropped to a whisper filled with years of accumulated pain. I can solve calculus problems in my head. I taught myself 3 programming languages using library computers, and I can remember everything I read after seeing it just once. But none of that matters when you're sleeping in doorways and digging through garbage for food. The weight of Emma's words settled over Richard like a heavy blanket woven from guilt and heartbreak. 2 years on the streets meant she'd been surviving completely alone since she was 4 years old, a situation so impossible it made her current technological capabilities seem even more miraculous and heartbreaking simultaneously. Your mother died 2 years ago? Emma, that would make you only 4 when you started living on the streets. How did you possibly survive? Where were social services, child protective services, the foster care system? Emma's eyes hardened with a maturity that shattered Richard's heart into pieces. I'm exceptionally good at hiding, and I learned very quickly that the system doesn't work for kids like me. Foster care meant getting separated from everything I knew, placed with strangers who wouldn't understand my intelligence or my needs. The streets were dangerous, but at least they were honest about their dangers. She reached into her jacket again, this time pulling out a crumpled photograph that she handled with infinite, reverential care. The image was protected in a plastic sandwich bag, clearly treasured beyond all her other possessions. My mom's name was Sarah Chen. She used to work at Bean There coffee shop downtown, the one near your old office building on Pine Street. She said she met my father there every morning for 3 months, but he never knew about me because she made the decision never to tell him. Richard's blood turned to ice as memories flooded back with crystalline clarity, each recollection hitting him like physical blows. Sarah Chen, the beautiful barista with the infectious laugh and an almost magical ability to make even the most complicated espresso order seem like performance art. She'd been the bright spot in his mornings during the darkest period of his entrepreneurial life 8 years ago, when Sterling Tech was just a dream sketched on napkins, and he was working 18-hour days on their first prototype, living on coffee, determination, and the hope that his ideas would someday change the world. She had the most beautiful smile I've ever seen, Richard whispered, his voice breaking with recognition and overwhelming regret. And she always remembered everyone's order perfectly, even if they'd only been in once. She could make conversation with anyone, construction workers, lawyers, students, but she had this incredible way of making you feel like you were the only person in the world when she talked to you. Emma's eyes widened with surprise and desperate, almost painful hope. You actually knew her. You actually remember my mom. Richard's hands shook as the pieces began falling into place with mathematical precision, each memory clicking into a larger pattern that took his breath away. Emma, what's your complete full name? When exactly is your birthday? I need to know the precise date. Emma Sarah Chen, February 22nd, 2018, she said quietly, watching his face with the intensity of someone whose entire future hung on his reaction. Mom always said I was her Valentine's miracle baby because I was conceived around Valentine's Day 2017. She said my father was a brilliant man who was going to change the world with his technological inventions. Richard's chair scraped loudly against the floor as he stood abruptly, his mind calculating dates with the precision that had made him a successful tech mogul. February 2018, conceived in February 2017, exactly 7 years ago, during those magical 3 months with Sarah. The months before Marcus convinced him to focus solely on business development, before venture capitalists started demanding 18-hour days, before the endless meetings and investor presentations consumed his life, before he stopped visiting the coffee shop that had become his daily sanctuary and source of joy. The months before he lost touch with the only woman who'd ever made him feel like he was more than just his work, more than just his ambitions, more than just another tech entrepreneur chasing Silicon Valley dreams. Oh my God, he breathed, staring at the child who had his eyes, his stubborn chin, his love of complex puzzles and mathematical precision. Emma, I know with absolute certainty that I'm your father. The revelation hung in the air between them like a fragile soap bubble, beautiful and terrifying, and ready to burst at the slightest wrong move or careless word. Emma's small hand crept across the white tablecloth toward Richard's. her fingers trembling with 7 years' worth of accumulated hope and fear, compressed into a single, life-changing moment. "I know," she whispered, so quietly he almost missed it over the restaurant's ambient noise. "I've known for weeks. I found an old Polaroid photograph in Mom's things after she died, you and her at Pike Place Market. Both of you laughing by the fish vendors while holding matching cups of coffee." She wrote on the back, in her careful handwriting, "Richard Sterling, the love of my life, Emma's father, March 15th, 2017, the perfect birthday." Richard's heart shattered and rebuilt itself in the same instant. Waves of emotion crashing over him with overwhelming force. The date on the photograph would have been his 29th birthday, a day he remembered with perfect clarity now that the context had changed everything. He'd spent it with Sarah exploring Pike Place Market, buying fresh flowers that made her sneeze but laugh, talking about dreams and possibilities and the future they might build together. It had been absolutely perfect. One of the last genuinely perfect days before his life became consumed with investor meetings, product development deadlines, and the relentless pressure of building a tech empire. "She never told me, Emma. I never knew she was pregnant. If I had known..." He reached across the table, covering her tiny, cold hand with his warm one. "I would have been there for absolutely everything. The pregnancy, the medical appointments, helping with money, raising you. I would never, ever have abandoned you, sweetheart. Never in a million years." Tears streamed down Emma's dirt-smudged cheeks, cutting clean tracks through the grime of street life. "She didn't want to burden you with responsibility you didn't choose. Mom said you were building something incredibly important, something that would help millions of people someday. She made me promise to find you only if I really, really needed help, if there was no other choice. And now you do," Richard said, understanding flooding through him like a river breaking through a dam. "Living on the streets, no proper education despite your incredible intelligence, no one caring about your potential or recognizing your gifts." Emma nodded, pulling the photograph closer so he could see it clearly in the restaurant's lighting. There they were, Richard and Sarah, both so young, so happy, so completely unaware of the heartbreak and separation that lay ahead. Sarah's hand was resting protectively on her stomach in the photo, and Richard realized with a shock of recognition that she might have already known she was pregnant, but hadn't found the courage to tell him yet. "I've been watching you for months, Daddy," Emma said, the word slipping out naturally, like she'd been practicing it in private. "Learning your routines, understanding your business model, studying the people around you, analyzing their behavior patterns. When Marcus betrayed you today, I knew it was finally time. Mom always said that family helps family, no matter what the circumstances." Richard stared at his daughter, his brilliant, resourceful, heartbreakingly brave daughter who'd spent weeks conducting sophisticated surveillance, learning about complex financial crimes and developing a comprehensive plan to save him when everyone else had given up hope. "You're absolutely incredible. Emma, your mother raised an amazing little girl under impossible circumstances." "So you'll look at what's on the USB drive?" Emma asked, hope lighting up her features like sunrise after the longest, darkest night of winter. Richard's eyes hardened with determination and fierce paternal protectiveness. "We'll look at it together, as father and daughter. And Emma, if this information is real, if you've actually found a way to recover my fortune..." He paused, his voice thick with emotion and absolute certainty. "I'm not just going to put you in school. I'm going to adopt you officially, legally, permanently. You're my daughter, and I should have been taking care of you from the very beginning." Richard's high-end laptop screen illuminated their faces in the dim restaurant corner as Emma navigated through files with the expertise and confidence of a seasoned cybersecurity analyst. Her small fingers flew across the keyboard with precision that defied her age, opening folder after folder of meticulously organized evidence that would have impressed the FBI's most experienced investigators. "See this specific transaction sequence?" Emma pointed to a series of complex financial transfers displayed in neat, color-coded rows. Marcus thought he was being incredibly clever, routing your money through 17 different offshore accounts across 12 countries, using shell companies and cryptocurrency exchanges to muddy the trail. But he made one critical, fatal mistake. He used the same base encryption algorithm for all the transfers, and it's based on a mathematical pattern I recognized immediately. Richard squinted at the screen, amazed by the complexity and thoroughness of the data his 6-year-old daughter had compiled. How could you possibly recognize an encryption pattern this sophisticated? Emma, this is graduate-level computer science and advanced cryptography. Emma's voice carried a pride that made Richard's chest swell with paternal admiration, mixed with heartbreak for all the years he'd missed watching her grow and develop these incredible abilities. I've been teaching myself programming and advanced mathematics since I was 4 years old, using the computers at the Central Public Library. When you're homeless, you have endless time to learn, and the internet contains everything if you know where to look and how to access it. The pattern Marcus used is based on the Fibonacci sequence, but he modified it using a combination of your birthday numbers and what he thought were random elements. She clicked through more screens with practiced ease, revealing bank records, encrypted communication logs, even high-definition video files of Marcus meeting with competitors in hotel lobbies and coffee shops around the world. Every stolen dollar was accounted for, every betrayal documented with precision that would make federal prosecutors weep with joy. This particular meeting here, Emma indicated a timestamp from 3 days ago, happened at the Fairmont Olympic Hotel. Marcus sold your proprietary AI algorithm, the one you've been developing for 3 years, to Technova Industries for $50 million in untraceable cryptocurrency. But he was sloppy and overconfident. He used his real name on the hotel registration, and I have complete footage of the entire transaction from multiple security cameras. Richard's jaw dropped in amazement. You hacked hotel security systems? I didn't hack anything. Oh, Daddy, Emma said with the matter-of-fact tone of someone explaining basic arithmetic to a child. I just asked the maintenance supervisor very politely if I could use the lobby restroom, and while I was there, I noticed their security monitoring station was logged in and unattended. It only took 30 seconds to download the relevant files to my phone using a USB adapter. The evidence was overwhelming and absolutely damning in its completeness. Marcus hadn't just stolen money. He'd committed dozens of federal crimes over an 18-month period, leaving a digital trail so comprehensive it would send him to federal prison for the rest of his natural life. But more importantly for Richard's immediate situation, every transaction was completely reversible, every hidden account traceable and recoverable. Emma, this is genius-level detective work and forensic accounting. How did you learn to do all this? The little girl shrugged, suddenly shy under her father's amazed and admiring gaze. Mom always said I was special, that I could understand things other kids couldn't even imagine. She taught me to read when I was 2 years old, and by the time I was 4, I was reading college-level textbooks from the library and understanding most of the concepts. When you don't have toys or games or normal childhood distractions, books and computers become your best friends and teachers. Richard's throat tightened with overwhelming emotion and crushing regret. While he'd been living in penthouse luxury, attending expensive restaurants, flying first class around the world for business meetings, his brilliant daughter had been educating herself in public libraries, sleeping in doorways, surviving on scraps and pure determination, developing skills that surpassed those of trained professionals. I'm so sorry, sweetheart. I'm sorry I wasn't there to protect you, to help you, to celebrate how incredibly intelligent you are, to give you the life and opportunities you deserved. It's okay. Daddy, Emma said, reaching up to touch his face with tiny fingers that trembled with emotion. You're here now. And tomorrow we're going to make Marcus Webb very, very sorry he ever decided to betray our family. Richard saved the files to his most secure encrypted drive, his mind already planning their next moves with the strategic thinking that had built his technological empire. Tomorrow morning, we're taking this evidence directly to the FBI. Then we're going to my lawyers to start adoption proceedings immediately. And then, he smiled, feeling genuine hope bloom in his chest for the first time in 24 hours. Then we're going shopping for school supplies, proper clothes, and everything else my brilliant daughter needs and deserves. Emma's eyes sparkled with tears of pure joy. Does this mean you really believe me? About recovering all the money? Richard closed the laptop and pulled his daughter into the first real hug of their lives together. She smelled like rain and determination and the faintest trace of her mother's favorite lavender soap, a scent that brought back a flood of beautiful memories and broken dreams. I believe in you completely, Emma Sterling, and with evidence like this, Marcus Webb is about to discover that he made the biggest mistake of his miserable life when he decided to mess with our family. The FBI field office in downtown Seattle buzzed with controlled chaos at 8 a.m. sharp. Agents moving with the practiced efficiency of people accustomed to handling major federal crimes. Richard Sterling sat in the sterile conference room, his daughter Emma perched confidently beside him in a chair that made her look even smaller than her 6 years. Across from them sat Special Agent Sarah Martinez, a veteran cybercrime investigator whose reputation for cracking impossible cases was legendary throughout the Pacific Northwest. Mr. Sterling, I have to admit, when you called yesterday claiming a child had solved your partner's embezzlement, I was skeptical, Agent Martinez said, her dark eyes studying Emma with professional curiosity. But after reviewing the preliminary evidence you submitted, I'm frankly astounded. Emma sat straighter in her oversized chair, her small hands folded professionally in her lap. Agent Martinez, I understand your skepticism. Adults often underestimate children's capabilities, especially in technical fields. But I assure you, everything on that USB drive is legitimate and legally obtained. The federal agent's eyebrows rose at Emma's articulate response. Young lady, this evidence shows sophisticated financial crimes spanning 18 months, involving 12 countries and over 40 shell companies. The level of detail and technical analysis rivals work done by our best forensic accountants. How exactly did you compile all this information? Richard watched with pride as his daughter launched into a detailed explanation of her surveillance methods, her self-taught programming skills, and her systematic approach to tracking Marcus Webb's digital footprints. Every word demonstrated the exceptional intelligence that had allowed her to survive on the streets while developing skills that surpassed those of trained professionals. The key breakthrough came when I realized Marcus was using a modified Fibonacci sequence for his encryption keys, Emma continued, pulling out her notebook filled with mathematical calculations. He thought he was being clever by incorporating personal dates and random elements. But patterns are patterns, Agent Martinez. Once you understand the underlying logic, the entire scheme becomes transparent. Agent Martinez leaned forward, genuinely impressed. Emma, this is graduate-level cryptanalysis. Where did you learn these techniques? The public library has excellent internet access, and there are thousands of educational resources available if you know where to look, Emma replied matter-of-factly. When you're homeless, you have a lot of time to study. I've read every cybersecurity textbook I could find, watched countless online lectures, and practiced on legal hacking platforms. The agent turned to Richard. Mr. Sterling, I need to ask, have you verified this child's claims about being your daughter? Because if she's telling the truth, we're looking at one of the most remarkable cases of natural talent I've encountered in 20 years of federal law enforcement. Richard's throat tightened with emotion. We're having DNA tests done this afternoon to make it official, but I have no doubt. Emma has my eyes, my analytical mind, and, he paused, his voice breaking slightly, she has her mother's heart. Sarah Chen was the most intelligent, caring woman I ever met. Emma is her daughter in every way that matters. Agent Martinez opened the case file containing Emma's evidence. Based on this documentation, we can issue federal warrants for Marcus Webb within hours. The evidence is so comprehensive that conviction is virtually guaranteed. But I have to ask, Emma, why did you wait so long to come forward? You've been watching him for months. Emma's young face grew serious. Because I needed to be absolutely certain, Agent Martinez. And because, she glanced at her father, I needed my daddy to believe in me first. Some battles are too important to fight alone. The agent smiled, the first genuine warmth she'd shown since they arrived. Well, Emma Sterling, you're about to help us take down one of the most sophisticated financial criminals we've seen. Are you ready to watch justice happen? Emma's eyes sparkled with determination. I've been ready my whole life. 3 days later, the Sterling Tech headquarters building hummed with renewed energy as federal agents executed search warrants throughout Marcus Webb's former office. Richard stood in his executive suite, watching through the floor-to-ceiling windows as FBI forensics teams carried out boxes of evidence, while Emma sat at his conference table, her small fingers flying across a laptop keyboard with increasing excitement. "Daddy, they found something big!" Emma announced, her voice barely containing her enthusiasm. "Agent Martinez just sent me the preliminary analysis of Marcus's hidden files. He wasn't working alone. There's an entire network of corporate executives involved in systematic theft from tech companies across the West Coast." Richard moved to stand behind his daughter, amazed once again by her ability to process complex information at superhuman speed. "What kind of network?" "Industrial espionage on a massive scale," Emma explained, pulling up a detailed organizational chart she'd created from the FBI data. Marcus was part of a group called the Silicon Collective, 12 executives from different tech companies who were stealing algorithms, customer data and trade secrets, then selling them to the highest bidders. Your company wasn't their first victim, Daddy. They've been doing this for years. The implications hit Richard like a physical blow. How many companies? How much money? Emma's young face grew grave. At least 37 companies over the past 5 years. Total estimated losses exceed $2 billion. Some smaller startups were completely destroyed, just like they tried to do to you. Richard's hands clenched into fists. Those bastards destroyed people's dreams, entire families' livelihoods. "Language, Daddy," Emma said gently, though her eyes shared his anger. "But yes, they hurt a lot of innocent people. That's why we have to make sure they all go to prison." Agent Martinez's voice came through the conference room speakers via video call. "Mr. Sterling, Emma, we've made a significant breakthrough. Based on Emma's evidence and the files we've recovered, we've identified the entire network. We're executing simultaneous raids in 7 cities as we speak." Emma leaned toward the camera. "Agent Martinez, did you find the master server I identified? The one Marcus thought he'd hidden in the Cayman Islands?" "We did, and it's a gold mine. Financial records, communication logs, even video recordings of their planning meetings. Emma, your analysis was absolutely perfect. We've recovered evidence of crimes dating back to 2019. Richard felt a surge of protective pride watching his 6-year-old daughter discuss federal investigations with seasoned agents as if she'd been doing it her entire life. "What happens now?" "Now we build the strongest federal case in cybercrime history," Agent Martinez replied. "Emma's initial evidence was so comprehensive that we're looking at multiple life sentences for the ringleaders. Marcus Webb will spend the rest of his life in federal prison." Emma's small hand found Richard's. "And the money, Agent Martinez? Can Daddy's company recover everything they stole?" "Thanks to your meticulous documentation, Emma, we can trace and recover approximately 94% of the stolen funds. The assets frozen in various accounts total over $630 million. Sterling Tech will not only survive, it will emerge stronger than ever." Richard's vision blurred with tears of relief and gratitude. 3 days ago, he'd been facing bankruptcy and the destruction of everything he'd built. Now, thanks to his remarkable daughter, justice was being served and his company would recover completely. "There's more," Agent Martinez continued. The Department of Justice wants to offer Emma a special commendation for her assistance in this investigation. Her work has helped us crack the largest corporate espionage ring in Pacific Northwest history. Emma's eyes widened with surprise and pride. Really? They want to give me an award? You deserve it, sweetheart, Richard said, hugging her close. You saved not just our company, but dozens of other businesses and thousands of jobs. Emma looked up at her father with shining eyes. Does this mean I can start school now? Real school, with teachers and other kids? Richard's heart swelled with love and determination. Tomorrow, we're enrolling you in the best private school in Seattle. And Emma, he paused, his voice thick with emotion. I'm never letting anyone underestimate you again. The prestigious Lakeside Academy sat on 15 manicured acres overlooking Lake Washington, its brick buildings and ivy-covered walls representing the pinnacle of private education in Seattle. Richard held Emma's hand as they walked through the main entrance, her small figure dwarfed by the grandeur of the institution that had educated senators, tech moguls, and Nobel Prize winners. Dr. Patricia Whitman, the school's headmistress for 23 years, greeted them in her mahogany-paneled office. Her silver hair was pulled back in a perfect bun, and her sharp blue eyes missed nothing as she studied the unlikely pair before her, one of Seattle's most prominent tech executives and a 6-year-old girl whose standardized test scores had shattered every record in the school's history. Mr. Sterling, I've reviewed Emma's entrance examinations 3 times, Dr. Whitman said, her voice carrying a mixture of amazement and professional skepticism. Her mathematics scores place her at a graduate level. Her reading comprehension exceeds most high school seniors, and her scientific reasoning abilities are, well, frankly unprecedented for someone her age. Emma sat quietly in the oversized leather chair, her legs swinging slightly as she waited for the adults to finish their discussion. She'd grown accustomed to being the subject of such conversations, adults struggling to reconcile her appearance with her capabilities. Dr. Whitman, I understand this is unusual, Richard began, but the headmistress raised her hand. Unusual doesn't begin to describe it, Mr. Sterling. In my 23 years here, I've never encountered a child with Emma's combination of intellectual gifts and unique life experiences. Our youngest student is typically 8 years old, and even our most advanced children don't demonstrate this level of cognitive development. Emma finally spoke, her voice clear and confident. Dr. Whitman, I understand your concerns. My educational background is unconventional, and my social development may not match typical children my age. But I'm eager to learn in a structured environment with qualified teachers and age-appropriate social interactions. The headmistress's eyebrows rose. Emma, can you tell me what you hope to gain from attending Lakeside Academy? Comprehensive education in subjects I haven't been able to study independently, Emma replied thoughtfully. Art, music, physical education, and most importantly, the opportunity to interact with other children. I've spent 2 years with primarily adult interactions or complete isolation. I need to learn how to be a kid while continuing to develop my intellectual capabilities. Dr. Whitman leaned back in her chair, clearly impressed. And what subjects interest you most? Emma's eyes lit up. Advanced mathematics, computer science, and forensic accounting. But I'm also curious about literature, history, and biology. I've read extensively, but I'd love to discuss these subjects with teachers and classmates. Forensic accounting? Dr. Whitman asked, surprised. Richard smiled proudly. Emma recently helped the FBI solve a major corporate espionage case. She's received a commendation from the Department of Justice. The headmistress's professional composure cracked slightly. She what? I identified patterns in financial crimes that trained investigators missed, Emma explained matter-of-factly. It was primarily pattern recognition and mathematical analysis, skills I developed while living on the streets. Dr. Whitman was quiet for a long moment, studying Emma with new understanding. Emma, may I ask about your living situation? Mr. Sterling mentioned you recently discovered he was your father. Emma's small hand found Richard's. I was homeless for 2 years after my mother died. I survived by being smart, observant, and invisible, but now I have my daddy, and he wants to give me the education and opportunities I've always dreamed of. The headmistress's expression softened considerably. Emma, your story is remarkable, and your resilience is inspiring. However, I have concerns about placing you with children who haven't experienced your challenges. Some of our students come from very privileged backgrounds and may not understand your perspectives. Dr. Whitman, Richard interjected. Emma has survived situations that would break most adults. I think she can handle some privileged 6-year-olds. Emma giggled, the first truly childlike sound she'd made during the entire meeting. Daddy, I think Dr. Whitman is worried about me being a bad influence on the other kids, not the other way around. Dr. Whitman smiled, despite herself. You're quite perceptive, Emma. Tell me, how do you think you'd handle classmates who might not appreciate your advanced capabilities? Emma grew serious. I'd try to help them learn without making them feel inferior. Intelligence isn't about being better than others. It's about using your gifts to help people. That's what my daddy taught me, and what my mom always said. The headmistress looked at Richard, then back at Emma. Mr. Sterling, I'm prepared to accept Emma on a trial basis. She'll work with our counselors to ensure proper social integration, and will develop an individualized academic program that challenges her appropriately while allowing normal childhood development. Emma's face lit up with pure joy. Really? I can start school? Monday morning, 8 a.m. sharp, Dr. Whitman confirmed. Welcome to Lakeside Academy, Emma Sterling. 2 weeks into Emma's school experience, Richard received an urgent call that would change everything they thought they knew about Marcus Webb's betrayal. Agent Martinez's voice carried an unusual tension as she requested an immediate meeting at FBI headquarters, and when Richard arrived with Emma, he found the conference room filled with federal agents, prosecutors, and a man he didn't recognize wearing an expensive suit and the unmistakable bearing of government authority. Mr. Sterling, Emma, I'd like you to meet Deputy Director James Harrison from the FBI's Financial Crimes Division in Washington, D.C., Agent Martinez announced. He's flown in specifically to discuss developments in your case. Deputy Director Harrison studied Emma with intense curiosity before addressing them both. What I'm about to tell you is classified information that will become public within 48 hours. Emma's investigation has uncovered something far more significant than corporate espionage. Emma sat straighter in her chair, her analytical mind immediately alert. What did we find? Your evidence has led us to discover that Marcus Webb and his associates weren't just stealing from tech companies. Harrison continued. They were selling proprietary American technology, including military applications and classified algorithms, to foreign governments. This is a matter of national security. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Richard felt his blood turn cold. Are you saying Marcus was committing treason? Among other charges, yes. The AI algorithm he stole from Sterling Tech? It has applications in missile guidance systems and autonomous defense networks. When he sold it to Technova Industries, he unknowingly sold it to a front company for foreign intelligence services. Emma's young voice cut through the tension. Which foreign governments, Deputy Director Harrison? The federal official looked surprised by her direct question. Emma, that information is classified, but I can tell you that your father's technology is now being used against American interests abroad. Richard's hands clenched into fists. That algorithm was designed to help improve medical diagnostics and disaster response coordination. How could Marcus not know what he was selling? Because he didn't care, Emma said quietly, her voice carrying a wisdom beyond her years. When people become obsessed with money, they stop thinking about consequences. Marcus saw dollar signs, not the potential for harm. Deputy Director Harrison leaned forward. Emma, your analysis techniques have been so effective that the Department of Justice wants to offer your father a federal contract. Sterling Tech would work directly with the FBI and other agencies to develop cybersecurity tools and help investigate financial crimes. Emma looked at her father with shining eyes. "Daddy, you could use your company to help catch bad guys like Marcus." Richard felt a surge of purpose he hadn't experienced since the early days of building his company. What would this contract involve? Sterling Tech would become a specialized contractor for federal law enforcement agencies. Your AI technology, combined with Emma's analytical insights, could revolutionize how we investigate complex financial crimes and cybersecurity threats. Agent Martinez pulled out a thick folder. "There's more. Based on Emma's evidence, we've identified 14 other companies that were targeted by similar espionage rings. They want Sterling Tech to help them assess their vulnerabilities and recover stolen assets." Emma's mind was clearly racing. "Deputy Director Harrison, how many of these criminal networks are still active?" "Emma, we estimate there are at least 6 major operations still functioning across the country. Your work has given us the tools to identify and stop them, but we need Sterling Tech's expertise to move quickly." Richard looked at his 6-year-old daughter, amazed once again by her ability to see patterns and possibilities that escape trained professionals. "Emma, what do you think? Should we help the FBI catch more bad guys?" Emma's eyes sparkled with determination and excitement. "Daddy, I think we should help protect people the way Agent Martinez protected us. Besides," she added with a mischievous smile, "it sounds like fun." Deputy Director Harrison chuckled. "Emma, you may be the youngest federal consultant in FBI history. Can I get a badge?" Emma asked hopefully. "We'll see what we can arrange," Harrison replied, clearly charmed by her enthusiasm. Richard felt his heart swell with pride and purpose. 3 weeks ago, he'd been facing bankruptcy and betrayal. Now, thanks to his remarkable daughter, they were about to embark on a mission to protect American businesses and national security. "When do we start?" Richard asked. "Tomorrow," Harrison replied. "We have a case in Portland that needs your immediate attention. Another tech company, another missing algorithm, and another executive who's disappeared with millions in funding." Emma grinned. "Looks like we're going to be very busy, Daddy." The Portland office of Cascade Innovations looked remarkably similar to Sterling Tech's headquarters: modern glass building, expensive furniture, and the unmistakable atmosphere of a successful tech company facing sudden, catastrophic collapse. Richard and Emma sat in the conference room with company CEO Jennifer Walsh, a brilliant 34-year-old engineer whose world had imploded just 48 hours earlier when her business partner vanished with their company's revolutionary quantum computing breakthrough. "It's exactly like what happened to you," Jennifer explained, her voice shaking with exhaustion and betrayal. "David Chen, my partner for 6 years, disappeared overnight with our prototype, our research data, and every penny in our development accounts. The quantum algorithm we've been perfecting could revolutionize computing, and now it's gone." Emma's head snapped up at the mention of the name. "David Chen? Ms. Walsh, can you show me a photograph of your business partner?" Jennifer pulled out her phone, swiping to a picture of her and a man in his 40s at a company celebration. Emma studied the image intently, her young face growing serious as recognition dawned. "Daddy, I need to see the FBI files on Marcus's associates immediately," Emma said, her voice carrying an urgency that made everyone in the room pay attention. Richard opened his secure laptop, accessing the federal database they'd been given clearance to use. Emma's fingers flew across the keyboard, pulling up surveillance photos and criminal profiles, until she found what she was looking for. "There," Emma announced, pointing at the screen. "David Chen, age 43, originally from Vancouver. Ms. Walsh, your business partner is Marcus Webb's cousin, and he's been planning this theft for over a year." Jennifer's face went white. "That's impossible. David and I have been friends since college. He helped me start this company." Emma pulled out her notebook, flipping to a page covered with family trees and relationship diagrams. "I've been mapping the connections between all the criminals in Marcus's network. David Chen changed his name when he moved to Portland 5 years ago. His real name is David Webb Chen, and he's been feeding information about your company to his cousin the entire time. Richard stared at his daughter in amazement. Emma, how did you figure this out? Pattern recognition. Daddy, when Ms. Walsh mentioned the name Chen, it triggered a memory. I've seen that name in Marcus's encrypted communications, but I hadn't connected it to a specific person until now. Agent Martinez's voice came through their secure phone connection from Seattle. Emma, you're telling us this theft was planned for years? At least 18 months, Emma confirmed, pulling up more evidence on the laptop. Look at these financial records. David has been slowly moving money into offshore accounts, setting up shell companies, and preparing escape routes. The theft of your quantum algorithm wasn't opportunistic, Ms. Walsh. It was the final phase of a long-term operation. Jennifer slumped in her chair. 6 years of friendship, 6 years of building this company together. And it was all a lie. Emma's voice grew gentle, showing the compassionate heart she'd inherited from her mother. Ms. Walsh, I know how much this hurts. My daddy trusted Marcus for 8 years before discovering the betrayal. But here's the good news. Because I know their patterns now, I can track David's movements and find your stolen algorithm. You can recover our technology? Jennifer asked, hope flickering in her eyes. Emma was already typing, her small fingers dancing across the keyboard with increasing speed. David is following the same playbook Marcus used, which means he's made the same mistakes. He thinks he's being clever, but he's actually very predictable. Within minutes, Emma had traced David Chen's digital footprints to a series of cryptocurrency transactions and offshore transfers. Found him. He's in Vancouver, trying to sell your quantum algorithm to the same foreign buyers who purchased Daddy's AI technology. Richard felt a surge of pride and determination. Agent Martinez, can we coordinate with Canadian authorities to stop this sale? Already on it, came the reply. Emma, you've just prevented a major national security breach. That quantum algorithm could have been used to break military encryption systems. Emma looked up from the laptop, her young face serious but determined. Ms. Walsh, we can get your technology back and put David in prison with his cousin. But I need you to help me understand exactly how your quantum system works so I can identify it when the authorities recover it. Jennifer wiped away tears of relief and amazement. Emma, you're 6 years old. How can you possibly understand quantum computing? Emma smiled, the expression lighting up her entire face. Ms. Walsh, I've had a very unusual education. Besides, quantum mechanics is just advanced mathematics and physics. The hard part isn't understanding the science, it's catching the criminals who steal it. Richard hugged his daughter close, marveling once again at her incredible abilities and generous heart. Emma, you're not just solving crimes, you're protecting the future of American technology. Emma looked up at her father with shining eyes. Daddy, I think this is what I want to do when I grow up. Help good people and catch bad guys using math and computers. Then that's exactly what we'll do, sweetheart, together. 6 months later, the Sterling Foundation's new headquarters occupied an entire floor of the renovated Sterling Tech Building, its mission statement etched in gold letters across the reception area, protecting innovation, pursuing justice. Richard stood in his office, watching through floor-to-ceiling windows as Emma worked with a team of FBI analysts and federal prosecutors in the conference room below. Her 7-year-old voice clearly audible as she explained complex financial patterns to seasoned investigators. The transformation had been remarkable. Sterling Tech had not only recovered from Marcus Webb's betrayal, but had emerged as the leading federal contractor for cybercrime investigation. Emma's analytical methods had revolutionized how law enforcement approached financial crimes, and together, father and daughter had helped recover over $3 billion in stolen assets while putting 42 criminals behind bars. Agent Martinez entered Richard's office, carrying a thick folder and wearing the satisfied expression of someone delivering excellent news. Richard, I have the final report on the Marcus Webb investigation. He's been sentenced to life in federal prison without possibility of parole. His cousin David got 35 years. The entire Silicon Collective network has been dismantled. Richard smiled with deep satisfaction. And the recovered technologies? All returned to their rightful owners. Your AI algorithm is being used by the CDC to predict disease outbreaks. Jennifer Walsh's quantum system is helping NASA plan Mars missions, and 6 other stolen technologies are now serving humanitarian purposes instead of military threats. Through the office windows, they could see Emma explaining something to a group of federal agents, her small hands gesturing enthusiastically as she drew diagrams on a whiteboard that towered above her. At 7 years old, she was already recognized as the FBI's most effective financial crime consultant, though she still insisted on keeping regular school hours and maintaining friendships with classmates who had no idea their friend was helping solve major federal cases. "How's she adjusting to normal childhood?" Agent Martinez asked, following Richard's gaze. "Remarkably well. Dr. Whitman says Emma's social development has accelerated rapidly now that she feels secure and loved. She's still academically years ahead of her peers, but she's learning to be a kid, playing games, making friends, even joining the school's chess club and mathematics team." Agent Martinez laughed. "I bet she dominates both. Completely, but she's learned to help her teammates improve rather than just winning everything herself. She's developing the same generous heart her mother had." The conference room door opened, and Emma bounded up the stairs to Richard's office, her school backpack slung over one shoulder and her FBI consultant badge pinned proudly to her sweater. "Daddy, Agent Martinez, we solved the Seattle port case. The shipping company was using fake manifests to smuggle stolen computer chips to Eastern Europe, but I found the pattern in their customs declarations." Agent Martinez knelt to Emma's eye level. "Emma, you've helped us close 15 major cases in 6 months. The director wants to know if you'd be interested in a summer program for gifted young people interested in law enforcement careers." Emma's eyes lit up. "Really? With other kids who like solving puzzles and catching bad guys? Really? You'd be the youngest participant ever, but based on your track record, you've more than earned the opportunity." Richard watched his daughter's face glow with excitement and pride. The scared, homeless little girl who'd approached him in a restaurant 6 months ago had transformed into a confident, brilliant, beloved child whose extraordinary gifts were finally being recognized and nurtured. "Daddy, can I do the summer program? I promise I'll still have time for regular kid stuff like swimming and movies and playing with my friends." Richard hugged Emma close, his heart overflowing with love and pride. "Sweetheart, you can do anything you set your mind to. You've already proven that impossible things become possible when someone believes in you." Emma looked up at him with shining eyes. "And when family helps family, right, Daddy?" "Always," Richard confirmed. "We're a team now, Emma Sterling, forever." As the Seattle sunset painted the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, Richard reflected on the incredible journey that had brought them together. Marcus Webb's betrayal had nearly destroyed everything Richard had built, but it had also led him to discover the most precious treasure of his life, his brilliant, courageous, amazing daughter. Emma was already planning their next case, her young mind racing with possibilities and mathematical probabilities. Together, they would continue protecting other families from the kind of betrayal they'd survived, using Emma's extraordinary gifts and Richard's business expertise to serve justice and help those who couldn't help themselves. The future stretched ahead of them, full of challenges and opportunities, criminals to catch and technologies to protect. But whatever came next, they would face it together. Father and daughter, partners in justice, proof that sometimes the most unexpected heroes come in the smallest packages. "So what's our next case, sweetheart?" Richard asked. Emma grinned, pulling out a new notebook already filled with observations and theories. "There's a pharmaceutical company in San Francisco whose research data keeps disappearing, and I think I know why. Millionaire signs a contract blindly and loses 4.3B, bankrupting his company, until a little orphan girl makes a shocking proposal and leaves him pale. Before we dive into this moving story of sadness and isolation, drop a comment with your location and subscribe for more emotional content. The pen felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds in Marcus Wellington's trembling hand. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the Arctic air conditioning in his corner office, 45 floors above Manhattan's bustling streets. The contract spread across his mahogany desk might as well have been written in ancient hieroglyphics, pages and pages of legal jargon that blurred together in his exhausted mind. "Just sign here, Mr. Wellington," the lead attorney from Blackstone Industries said, his voice smooth as silk and twice as dangerous. He tapped a manicured finger on the signature line, his cold smile promising riches beyond imagination. $4.3 billion for your AI technology patents, the biggest tech acquisition in American history. Marcus's empire, Wellington Technologies, had taken him 23 grueling years to build from absolutely nothing. He still remembered sleeping in his beat-up Honda Civic as a broke college dropout, surviving on ramen noodles and sheer determination. From that lowest point to commanding a fortune that put him in the top 50 richest Americans, every step had been earned through blood, sweat, and 18-hour workdays. But now the vultures were circling with predatory patience. Competitors had systematically stolen his best engineers with offers he couldn't match. Major investors were pulling out faster than rats abandoning a sinking ship, spooked by mysterious rumors about Wellington Technologies' financial stability. The board of directors, led by his former friend Richard Ashworth, had been pressuring him for months to consider a buyout before the company collapsed entirely. "I need more time to review these terms with my legal team," Marcus said, his voice hoarse from 3 days of non-stop negotiations. The contract was massive, nearly 900 pages of dense legal language that would take weeks to properly analyze. "The offer expires at midnight," another lawyer interrupted smoothly, checking his Rolex with theatrical precision. "Blackstone won't wait, Mr. Wellington. Market conditions are volatile. Sign now or lose everything anyway when your company files for bankruptcy next month." The clock on Marcus's wall ticked like a time bomb, counting down to his doom. 11:47 p.m., 13 minutes to make the biggest decision of his life. He thought about his ex-wife Patricia, who'd divorced him 2 years ago after 20 years of marriage, claiming he loved his company more than his family. She'd taken half his assets and their 15-year-old daughter Sophia to London, leaving him alone with his empire and his regrets. He thought about the 300 loyal employees who'd lose their jobs if Wellington Technologies went under. Good people with families, mortgages, dreams that depended on his leadership. He thought about the revolutionary AI technology they'd developed, innovations that could change the world but might die with his company's collapse. The lawyers sat in predatory silence, their shark-like smiles never wavering. They knew exactly what pressure points to push, exactly how desperate he'd become. Marcus had built Wellington Technologies on his ability to read people, to see through deception and manipulation. But exhaustion and desperation had clouded his judgment, made him vulnerable to exactly the kind of corporate warfare he'd once excelled at detecting. At 11:59 p.m., with his empire crumbling around him and nowhere else to turn, Marcus Wellington signed his name with a flourish that felt like signing his own death warrant. The lawyers smiled like sharks who'd just smelled blood in the water. They gathered the contracts quickly, professionally, efficiently, a well-rehearsed dance of corporate predation. Within minutes, Marcus was alone in his corner office with nothing but a company credit card that would be cancelled by morning, and the sinking realization that he'd just made the biggest mistake of his life. His phone buzzed with an incoming text. A message from his personal attorney, David Chen. "Marcus, do not sign anything from Blackstone under any circumstances." Found the buried clause on page 847. "They're not just taking your patents, they're taking everything. Your name, your technology, your right to compete." Call me immediately, no matter what time you get this. Marcus stared at the message timestamp, 12:01 a.m., 1 minute too late. His hands shook as the full implications crashed over him like a tsunami of realization. Tomorrow morning, he'd discover that Blackstone's contract contained hidden provisions that stripped him of not just his patents, but his right to work in technology for the next 20 years. They'd played him perfectly, using his desperation and his love for his employees against him like a weapon. By dawn, Marcus Wellington, once worth $4.3 billion, would be broke, blacklisted and utterly broken. But he didn't know that yet. Right now, he was just a man who'd bet everything on what he desperately hoped was salvation, but feared might be his destruction. The city lights twinkled below him like fallen stars, beautiful and impossibly distant. Soon, he'd be down there among them. Just another broken dreamer in a city full of shattered ambitions. 3 weeks later, Marcus sat in Tony's Pizza Palace on 47th Street, a grease-stained establishment that was about as far from his former five-star restaurants as a man could fall without hitting rock bottom. The slice of pepperoni pizza before him had cost $2.50, more than he could comfortably afford from his rapidly dwindling resources. His custom-tailored Armani suits had been replaced by clothes from Goodwill that hung awkwardly on his frame, and his penthouse apartment with its breathtaking city views was now a cramped one-room studio in Queens with a radiator that clanged like a ghost in chains all through the night. The Blackstone contract had been a masterpiece of corporate warfare, a perfectly orchestrated destruction that Sun Tzu himself would have admired. Not only had they acquired his patents for a fraction of their true worth, but they'd systematically destroyed his reputation with surgical precision. Within hours of the contract signing, leaked internal documents had surfaced, suggesting that Marcus had been embezzling from his own company for years. Financial records that seemed damning appeared in the hands of business journalists. Former employees came forward with carefully crafted stories of workplace misconduct and financial irregularities. It was character assassination performed by masters of the craft. Within days, every door in Silicon Valley had slammed shut with thunderous finality. Former allies crossed the street to avoid being seen with him. Investors who'd once competed for his attention now treated his phone calls like radioactive waste. The tech industry had rendered its verdict. Marcus Wellington was persona non grata. His bank accounts had been frozen pending a federal investigation that could drag on for years. His assets were tied up in litigation that would cost millions he no longer possessed. The only money he had access to was the $300 in cash from his wallet, his emergency fund that had never been intended for an emergency this catastrophic. Marcus picked at the congealed cheese on his pizza crust, remembering when he'd casually spent more on a single bottle of wine than he now had to live on for a week. The irony cut deep. He'd once donated more to charity in a single afternoon than his current net worth. Now he was counting quarters like a man who'd never seen prosperity, let alone commanded billions. The restaurant around him buzzed with the conversations of working-class New Yorkers grabbing quick meals between shifts, construction workers in paint-stained coveralls, taxi drivers taking quick breaks, retail workers stretching their lunch dollars. These were people who understood struggle in ways his former billionaire peers never could. There was an honesty in their exhaustion that Marcus found both humbling and strangely comforting. The bell above the restaurant door chimed with a cheerful sound that seemed out of place in his current reality. A small figure entered, a little girl who couldn't have been more than 8 years old, with dark hair braided with careful precision and clothes that had clearly seen better days but were meticulously clean. She looked around the restaurant with nervous energy before her intelligent eyes settled on his table, specifically on the half-eaten pizza slice and the untouched garlic bread he'd been too nauseous to finish. She approached his table with careful steps, clutching a small purse that appeared to be handmade from colorful fabric scraps. Her shoes were held together with carefully applied tape, But they were spotless. Poor but proud, Marcus recognized the combination because he'd lived it himself decades ago. "Excuse me, sir." Her voice was soft but remarkably clear, carrying a slight Hispanic accent that added music to her words. "I'm really sorry to bother you, but I was wondering, could I maybe have the rest of your food? It's for my mama, and I can pay you for it." Marcus looked up at her properly for the first time, really seeing her. She was thin, too thin for a growing child, but her posture was straight and her gaze direct. There was an intelligence in her dark eyes that seemed far older than her chronological years, a sharpness that reminded him of himself at his most focused. This wasn't a child begging. This was someone making a business proposition. "What's your name, sweetheart?" he asked gently, his voice rusty from lack of use. "Emma Rodriguez, sir. My mama is working really late again tonight, cleaning houses for people in Manhattan, and she hasn't had anything to eat today." The girl's chin jutted out with defiant pride. "I have 50 cents I can pay you for the food. I know it's not much, but it's what I have." Something in Marcus's chest tightened painfully. He'd been so completely consumed by his own spectacular fall from grace that he'd forgotten there were people in the world who'd never had grace to fall from in the first place. "Keep your 50 cents, sweetheart," Marcus said, sliding the plate across the table toward Emma with gentle care. "Take whatever you want. Take it all." Emma's eyes widened with surprise, but she didn't immediately grab the food. Instead, she studied Marcus with an intensity that made him distinctly uncomfortable, like she was seeing straight through to his soul. Her gaze took in his expensive but worn clothing, his hollow cheeks, the way his hands shook slightly from stress and too little sleep. "You're not from around here." "Are you?" she said with startling directness. "Your clothes are really expensive brands, but they're getting old now, and you look sad. Really, really sad." Marcus almost smiled despite everything, the first genuine expression of anything resembling happiness he'd felt in 3 weeks. "Is it that obvious?" "My mama cleans houses in the rich parts of Manhattan," Emma explained matter-of-factly, as she carefully wrapped the pizza slice and garlic bread in paper napkins with practiced efficiency. "I go with her sometimes when school's out, and I know what rich people look like when they're pretending not to be rich anymore. You have that same look." The wisdom in that simple observation hit Marcus like a physical blow to the stomach. This 8-year-old girl had just articulated something that 23 years in high-stakes business hadn't taught him, that desperation had its own unmistakable signature. "Your mama sounds like a very intelligent woman," he said quietly. "She's the smartest person I know," Emma replied with fierce pride. "She went to university in Columbia and studied civil engineering before she came here to America. She can design bridges and calculate load-bearing structures and solve mathematical problems that would make your head spin. But her degrees don't count here. So instead, she scrubs toilets for people who aren't half as smart as her." Emma's voice held no bitterness, just the matter-of-fact acceptance of an unfair world that had taught her harsh lessons far too early. "She never complains, though. She just works harder than anyone should have to work, and she tells me that someday things will be better if we're patient and smart about it." Marcus watched as she carefully secured the food in her little handmade purse, noting the way she handled each piece like it was precious cargo. Something nagged at him about this encounter, the way she'd sized him up so quickly. The calculating intelligence in her eyes that reminded him powerfully of his own younger self when he'd been hungry and desperate and determined to claw his way up from nothing. "Emma, can I ask you something?" he said, leaning forward slightly. "What do you want to be when you grow up?" "Rich," she answered immediately, without the slightest hesitation or embarrassment. "Rich enough that my mama never has to scrub another floor or say yes sir and no ma'am to people who treat her like she's completely invisible." "That's a very good goal," Marcus said carefully. "But how exactly do you plan to achieve it?" Emma looked at him like he'd just asked her to explain how breathing worked, like the answer should be completely obvious to anyone with half a brain. "By being smarter than everyone else, obviously. by learning how the game really works, instead of just stumbling around playing it blind. Marcus felt a genuine chill run down his spine. This wasn't the typical answer of an 8-year-old dreaming about being a princess, or a pop star, or a veterinarian. This was the calculated response of someone who had already figured out that life was fundamentally a game with rules heavily rigged in favor of the house, and that the only way to win was to understand those rules better than the people who'd written them. "Emma," he said slowly, testing the waters, "what if I told you that I once had $4.3 billion and lost every penny of it by signing a piece of paper I didn't properly understand?" Emma stopped organizing the contents of her purse and looked at him with sharp, sudden focus. Her entire demeanor changed in an instant, shifting from polite child to something far more dangerous and perceptive. "I'd say you're either lying to make yourself sound more interesting," she replied with startling directness, "or you're Marcus Wellington, and you got completely played by Blackstone Industries exactly 3 weeks and 2 days ago." The blood drained from Marcus's face so quickly he felt lightheaded. "How in God's name could you possibly know about that?" Marcus whispered, his voice barely audible above the restaurant's ambient noise. His heart was hammering so hard he could hear it in his ears. Emma shrugged, as if discussing billion-dollar corporate takeovers was perfectly normal conversation for an 8-year-old having dinner in a pizza joint. "I read everything I can get my hands on. Business sections of newspapers that rich people throw away without even opening, financial magazines in the public library, legal documents and contracts that Mama's employers leave lying around their offices and studies." Marcus stared at this small girl who had just casually referenced his most devastating failure, a failure he'd assumed was buried under layers of corporate secrecy, non-disclosure agreements, and legal confidentiality clauses that cost millions to enforce. "Most people don't know the specific details of what happened to me," he said carefully, testing her knowledge. The official press releases were very carefully worded to make it sound like a standard acquisition. "Most people don't know how to read between the lines of corporate speak," Emma replied with the confidence of someone much older. She pulled a small, worn notebook from her purse and flipped through pages covered in neat handwriting. "The news reports said Blackstone Industries acquired Wellington Technologies in a mutually beneficial strategic partnership. But the timing was completely wrong. The stock price movement was suspicious, and the language they used was classic distressed acquisition terminology." Marcus felt his mouth go completely dry. "What else do you think you know about my situation?" "I think you signed something you shouldn't have signed, because you were desperate and scared, and backed into a corner with no good options." Emma's voice was matter-of-fact, clinical in its assessment. "I think Blackstone played a really long game to put you in exactly that position, probably for years, before they made their move. And I think there's probably a way out of your contract that nobody's found yet, because all the lawyers and financial experts are thinking like lawyers and financial experts instead of thinking like—" She gestured to herself with a slight smile. "Like an 8-year-old?" Marcus asked, not sure whether to laugh or cry. "Like someone who's had to survive by being smarter than people who automatically underestimate her because of how she looks or where she comes from?" Emma's eyes held a fire that Marcus recognized from his own reflection 20 years ago, the burning determination of someone who refused to accept the limitations the world tried to impose. "Do you want to know what I think might be wrong with your contract?" Marcus laughed, actually laughed, for the first time in 3 weeks. The sound was bitter and broken, tinged with hysteria, but it was still genuine laughter. "Sure, sweetheart, please enlighten me about my billion-dollar mistake." Emma reached into her notebook and pulled out a carefully folded section of newspaper, the financial pages of the Wall Street Journal from 2 days earlier. There, buried on page C7, in a small article that most people would skip right over, was a report about Blackstone Industries facing increased scrutiny from the Federal Trade Commission for potential antitrust violations in 3 separate major acquisitions over the past 5 years. "Your contract almost certainly contains what corporate lawyers call a material adverse change clause," Emma said with the casual confidence of someone discussing the weather. If Blackstone gets broken up by federal regulators, or if they're found to have committed fraud or concealment during the acquisition process, the entire deal could potentially be voided and unwound. Marcus grabbed the newspaper with shaking hands, scanning the article with growing amazement. The dates mentioned in the FTC investigation lined up almost perfectly with his own contract timeline. His legal training from Harvard, rusty from decades of focusing on technology instead of law, began to kick in as he processed the implications. "Emma," he whispered, hardly daring to hope, "where on earth did you learn to think like this? This is graduate-level corporate law and federal regulatory theory." The little girl smiled for the first time since she'd entered the restaurant, and it transformed her entire face. "Poverty is the best business school in the world, Mr. Wellington. When you have no safety net and no second chances, you learn to think really, really fast. This is absolutely impossible," Marcus breathed, staring at the newspaper article like it contained the secrets of the universe. "You're 8 years old, Emma. You cannot possibly understand corporate law, federal antitrust regulations, and complex contract structures well enough to identify potential legal loopholes that teams of expensive lawyers missed." Emma's smile faded, replaced by the deadly serious expression of someone far older than her chronological years. When she spoke, her voice carried a weight that seemed impossible coming from someone so young. "Mr. Wellington, do you want to know the real reason I can read and understand these documents when most adults can't? It's because when your mama works 16-hour days for $2 an hour, and you're left alone in rich people's houses while she cleans their bathrooms and scrubs their floors, you learn to entertain yourself in whatever ways you can find." She pulled out her small notebook again, worn from constant use and filled with careful handwriting in different colored pens. "Those rich people whose houses Mama cleans, they leave their business magazines lying around like they're worthless. They leave confidential legal documents on their desks and kitchen counters. They take important phone calls right in front of us because they never think the cleaning lady's kid might actually be listening and understanding every word." Marcus flipped through the notebook with growing amazement and horror. Page after page of meticulous notes about stock option structures, patent law intricacies, corporate governance frameworks, merger and acquisition strategies, all written in the careful handwriting of a child, but containing insights that would make Harvard Business School professors weep with envy. "For almost 3 years now, I've been copying down every interesting thing I see or hear in these houses," Emma continued. "Contract language, business strategies, legal loopholes, financial structures. I've been teaching myself how the really wealthy people stay wealthy and why people like Mama and me stay poor no matter how hard we work." "Emma, this is extraordinary," Marcus said, his voice filled with genuine awe. "But you said you could help me reverse my contract situation. How is that even theoretically possible?" Emma's dark eyes lit up with the unmistakable excitement of someone finally being asked to reveal their greatest discovery. "Because I was there when they planned it, Mr. Wellington. I was actually there." "What do you mean you were there?" 3 weeks ago, the night you signed your contract, Mama was working late at the Blackstone Industries Executive Building downtown. She cleans the offices on the 42nd floor, including Mr. Harrison's corner office. He's their chief legal counsel, the man who designed your contract. Emma's voice dropped to an intense whisper. "I was with her that night because it was too late to leave me alone at home, and I heard them talking about you, about their whole plan." Marcus felt the world tilt sideways around him. "You heard them discussing my acquisition?" "I heard everything," Emma said with quiet intensity. "How they'd been planning your downfall for almost 2 years. How they planted negative stories about Wellington Technologies' financial stability in trade publications. How they bribed one of your board members, Mr. Richard Ashworth, to create internal pressure for a quick sale. How they deliberately timed market pressures to coincide with your personal vulnerabilities." Emma reached deeper into her notebook and pulled out what looked like a photocopy of an internal document. And while Mama was cleaning the bathrooms, I used their copy machine to make copies of documents they'd left on the conference room table. Marcus unfolded the paper with trembling hands, his heart hammering against his ribs. It was an internal Blackstone strategy document titled Project Wellington, Phase 3, Acquisition Completion. The contents made his blood run cold and his vision blur with rage. Every single pressure point they'd used against him was laid out in clinical, methodical detail. Every financial crisis that had driven him to desperation had been carefully orchestrated months in advance. Every supposed coincidence had been planned with surgical precision. They hadn't just taken advantage of his desperation, they had created it systematically, like scientists conducting an experiment on a laboratory rat. But at the bottom of the page, highlighted in yellow marker, was something even more damning. A timeline clearly showing that Blackstone had known about their pending FTC antitrust investigation, a full 6 months before they'd approached him with their acquisition offer. They had deliberately concealed material information that would have fundamentally changed his decision to sign. "Emma," Marcus whispered, his voice shaking with a combination of rage and hope he hadn't felt in weeks. "Do you understand what this document represents? This proves fraudulent concealment, market manipulation, and probably a dozen other federal crimes. This could void my entire contract and put half of Blackstone's executive team in prison." The little girl grinned with the satisfaction of someone who'd just delivered the perfect checkmate move. "I was really hoping you'd say that, Mr. Wellington. Now, do you want to hear my business proposal?" Emma leaned forward across the grimy table, her 8-year-old face wearing an expression of calculating intensity that would have been unsettling on a Fortune 500 CEO, let alone a child who should have been worried about homework and playground politics. "Here's my proposal, Mr. Wellington," she said, with the quiet confidence of someone who had thought through every possible angle. "You use my information and evidence to break your contract with Blackstone and reclaim control of Wellington Technologies. In exchange, you make me the youngest chief executive officer in American corporate history." Marcus nearly choked on the sip of coffee he'd just taken, coughing so hard that other diners turned to stare. "Emma, you're 8 years old. You can't legally sign contracts, vote, drive, or even stay home alone in most states. There's absolutely no way you could legally serve as a CEO of a major corporation." "You're absolutely right. I can't legally be CEO right now," she interrupted, with the patience of someone explaining something obvious to a slow student. "But I can legally serve as your senior strategic consultant and chief advisor. And when I turn 18 in exactly 10 years, you transfer majority ownership of the company to me through a carefully structured succession plan." Her eyes burned with an ambition that would have been genuinely frightening in an adult, let alone a child. 10 years, Mr. Wellington. 10 years of me working beside you every single day, learning every aspect of the business, studying every industry trend, preparing to take over when I'm legally old enough. And you never have to worry about being betrayed or manipulated again, because everything I achieve will be built on the foundation you give me. I'll owe my entire future to your decision to trust me." Marcus stared at this incredible child, his mind reeling from the sheer audacity of what she was proposing. The idea was insane, legally questionable, practically impossible, and yet there was something about her absolute certainty that made it seem almost reasonable. "Emma, why would you want this kind of responsibility? Most children your age dream about toys and games and summer vacations, not running multinational corporations and dealing with shareholders and regulatory compliance." Emma's voice grew soft and vulnerable for the first time since she'd sat down, revealing the hurt child beneath the calculating business mind. "Because right now, at this exact moment, my mama is on her hands and knees in some rich woman's marble bathroom, scrubbing toilet bowls for $2 an hour. She's been working since 5 o'clock this morning, and she won't get home until after midnight. She'll fall asleep in her uniform because she's too exhausted to change clothes. Tears gathered in the little girl's dark eyes, but her voice remained absolutely steady. "My mama is 26 years old, Mr. Wellington. She should be designing skyscrapers, or teaching advanced mathematics at a university, or running her own engineering firm. She has a brilliant mind that could change the world. Instead, she's invisible. People look right through her like she doesn't exist, like she doesn't matter, like her intelligence and her dreams are worthless because she cleans their houses." The raw pain in Emma's voice cut through Marcus like a knife. He recognized something in her expression, the same desperate hunger he'd felt as a young man sleeping in his car, the burning need to prove that the circumstances of your birth didn't have to determine the trajectory of your entire life. "I want to build something so massive, so powerful, so undeniably successful that no one will ever be able to make my mama feel small again," Emma continued, her voice growing stronger with each word. "And I want to do it legitimately, brilliantly, so that when people see Maria Rodriguez's daughter, they don't see some poor Hispanic girl who got lucky or slept her way to the top. They see the smartest, most capable businesswoman in the world who happened to be born into poverty but refused to let that define her limits." Marcus felt something crack open in his chest, a recognition of shared pain, shared ambition, shared determination to rewrite the story the world had written for them. "And if I refuse your proposal?" he asked quietly. Emma's vulnerability disappeared instantly, replaced by cold calculation. "Then you go back to your one-room apartment in Queens, eating discount pizza and feeling sorry for yourself while Blackstone Industries systematically destroys every trace of the empire you spent your life building. Your technology gets buried, your employees get fired, and your name becomes a cautionary tale about business failure." Her voice hardened with absolute certainty. "And I go back to watching my brilliant, beautiful mama destroy her body and her spirit for people who wouldn't notice if she disappeared tomorrow. We both lose everything, and powerful people who don't deserve their power keep winning." Marcus was quiet for a long moment, studying the impossible documents Emma had shown him, thinking about the sheer audacity and potential brilliance of what she was suggesting. The partnership she was proposing would be unlike anything in corporate history. A disgraced billionaire and a child genius taking on one of the most powerful companies in America. "You understand," he said slowly, "that if we do this, it won't just be about getting my company back. We'll be declaring war on some of the most ruthless, well-connected, politically protected people in the country. They have unlimited resources and no moral boundaries. They'll try to destroy both of us completely." Emma smiled, and for the first time, Marcus saw not just intelligence in her expression, but something far more dangerous, the absolute fearlessness of someone who had nothing left to lose. "Mr. Wellington," she said, extending her small hand across the stained table, "I've been at war with powerful people my entire life. The only difference is that now I'll finally have real weapons to fight back with, instead of just dreams and anger." Marcus looked at her outstretched hand, then at her determined face, then at the impossible future she was offering him, a future where his greatest mistake might become his greatest victory. Guided by an 8-year-old genius who understood the game of power better than players with decades more experience. He reached across the table and grasped her small hand in his much larger one. "Partners," he said solemnly. "Partners," Emma agreed, her smile blazing with triumph. "Now let's go save your empire and build mine." The law office of Chen, Martinez and Associates occupied the 15th floor of a modest building in Midtown Manhattan, a far cry from the gleaming corporate towers Marcus was accustomed to. But David Chen had been his personal attorney for 12 years, and one of the few people who hadn't abandoned him after the Blackstone disaster. "Marcus, this is absolutely insane," David said, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses as he stared at the documents Emma had spread across his mahogany conference table. "You're telling me an 8-year-old girl obtained classified internal documents from Blackstone Industries?" "I'm telling you, she has evidence that could destroy them," Marcus replied, watching Emma organize her materials with the precision of a seasoned paralegal. 3 days had passed since their partnership began, and he was still struggling to process the reality of working with a child genius. Emma looked up from her documents with the patient expression of someone dealing with particularly slow adults. "Mr. Chen, with respect, the how is less important than the what. These documents prove that Blackstone deliberately concealed material information about their FTC investigation. That constitutes fraudulent inducement, which voids the contract under New York corporate law." David's mouth fell open slightly. "How do you know New York corporate law?" "I read the Business Corporation Law sections 623 through 717 last month at the library," Emma said matter-of-factly. "The precedent case is Morrison Industries versus Hartwell Financial, decided by the New York Court of Appeals in 2019. Similar fact pattern, undisclosed regulatory investigation during acquisition negotiations." Marcus watched David's expression shift from skepticism to amazement to something approaching fear. As a Harvard Law graduate with 25 years of practice, David was witnessing an 8-year-old demonstrate legal knowledge that surpassed most junior associates. "Even if these documents are authentic," David said slowly, "Blackstone has unlimited resources and the best legal team money can buy. Harrison Mitchell is their general counsel. He's never lost a major corporate litigation in 15 years. They'll claim the documents are fabricated, question how they were obtained, and bury us in motions and appeals for decades." Emma smiled with quiet confidence. "That's why we're not going to court first, Mr. Chen. We're going to the media." Marcus felt his stomach drop. "Emma, we agreed to be careful." "We're going to be very careful," she interrupted. "But we need public pressure to force Blackstone's hand. Corporate fraud is only effective when it happens in the shadows. Once their tactics are exposed, their stock price will crash and their other acquisition targets will run for cover." She pulled out another document, a typed list of names that made Marcus's blood run cold. "These are the investigative journalists who've been tracking Blackstone's questionable practices for years. Sarah Martinez at the Financial Herald, Jonathan Wright at Corporate Watchdog, Rebecca Chen at the Wall Street Tribune. They've been waiting for smoking gun evidence like this." David leaned back in his chair, his expression a mixture of admiration and terror. "This child is proposing to wage economic warfare against one of the most powerful corporations in America. This child is proposing to expose criminals who think they're untouchable," Emma corrected firmly. "Mr. Wellington, in 48 hours, I need you to call Sarah Martinez and offer her the exclusive story. But first, we need insurance." "What kind of insurance?" Marcus asked. Though he suspected, he didn't want to know the answer. Emma's eyes glittered with strategic brilliance. "We need copies of these documents in the hands of people Blackstone can't touch. International journalists, overseas financial regulators, foreign competitors who would love to see Blackstone weakened. If they try to silence us, the story explodes globally." Marcus stared at this remarkable child who was calmly planning the destruction of a corporate empire with the same thoughtful precision most kids applied to video games. "Emma, if we do this, there's no going back. They'll come after us with everything they have." "Good," Emma said with fierce satisfaction. "I've been invisible my whole life. Mr. Wellington, it's time they noticed me." David gathered the documents with shaking hands. "I need 24 hours to verify the authenticity of these papers and research the legal implications. If you're really going to war with Blackstone, we need to be bulletproof." As they prepared to leave, Emma turned to Marcus with an expression of absolute determination. "Tomorrow, we start taking back everything they stole from you, and then we start building something they never saw coming." Marcus nodded, feeling equal parts terrified and exhilarated. The quiet 8-year-old who'd asked for pizza scraps was revealing herself to be a strategic mastermind with nerves of steel. The war for his empire was about to begin. The Financial Herald's newsroom buzzed with typical Wednesday afternoon chaos, phones ringing, keyboards clicking, reporters shouting questions across cubicles. Sarah Martinez sat at her desk reviewing quarterly earnings reports when her secure phone line rang with the distinctive tone reserved for confidential sources. "Martinez," she answered curtly. "Ms. Martinez, my name is Marcus Wellington. I believe you've been investigating Blackstone Industries' acquisition practices." Sarah nearly dropped her coffee. Marcus Wellington, the fallen tech billionaire whose spectacular downfall had been front-page news for weeks. "Mr. Wellington, I'm surprised to hear from you. Most sources assume you're in hiding. I'm ready to talk," Marcus said, "but not over the phone, and I'm bringing someone you need to meet." 2 hours later, Sarah sat in a private booth at Delancey's Deli on the Lower East Side, studying the most unlikely pair she'd ever interviewed. Marcus Wellington looked haggard but determined, while the small Hispanic girl beside him appeared to be organizing documents with the efficiency of a seasoned investigative reporter. "This is Emma Rodriguez," Marcus explained. "She's my consultant." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "Your consultant is 8 years old." "My consultant has evidence that will bring down Blackstone Industries," Marcus replied. "Emma, show her what you showed me." Emma slid a manila folder across the table with the confidence of someone delivering state secrets. "Ms. Martinez, these documents prove that Blackstone engaged in systematic fraud during their acquisition of Wellington Technologies. They concealed material information about federal investigations, manipulated market conditions, and bribed corporate insiders." Sarah opened the folder and felt her journalistic instincts ignite. The documents were explosive: internal memos detailing corporate espionage, financial records showing suspicious payments to Wellington board members, and timeline evidence of deliberate market manipulation. "How did you obtain these?" Sarah asked carefully. "My mama cleans Blackstone's executive offices," Emma replied matter-of-factly. "Rich people leave important papers lying around because they never think the cleaning lady's daughter might be reading them." Sarah studied Emma with growing fascination. The child spoke with the vocabulary and confidence of someone far beyond her years, organizing evidence with practiced skill. "Do you understand what these documents mean?" "They mean Blackstone Industries is about to face the biggest corporate scandal in a decade," Emma replied calmly. "They mean Marcus gets his company back, their stock price crashes, and other companies they've bullied finally have the evidence to fight back." Sarah felt the familiar thrill of a major story breaking. This is Pulitzer Prize-level investigative journalism, but Blackstone will claim these documents are fabricated. They'll question the source, challenge authenticity, and probably sue everyone involved. "Which is why we're not just talking to you," Emma said, producing another folder. "Copies of these documents are being delivered simultaneously to the Wall Street Tribune, Corporate Watchdog, and 3 international financial publications. If Blackstone tries to suppress the story in America, it goes global." Marcus watched Sarah's expression shift from skepticism to amazement. "She's thought of everything." "Sarah, legal angles, media strategy, international exposure. She's 8 years old, and she's planning corporate warfare like a seasoned strategist." Emma leaned forward with intense focus. "Ms. Martinez, Blackstone has been systematically destroying smaller companies for years. Wellington Technologies is just their latest victim, but if we expose their methods now, we can stop them before they ruin anyone else." Sarah closed the folder, her mind racing with the implications. "If I run this story, it will be the biggest financial scandal of the year. But it will also make both of you the most hunted people in corporate America." "We're already being hunted," Marcus replied grimly. "The difference is that now we're hunting back." Emma smiled with quiet determination. "The story runs tomorrow morning, Ms. Martinez. By noon, every financial market in the world will know what Blackstone Industries really is." Sarah nodded, recognizing the birth of a legend. An 8-year-old girl was about to take down one of America's most powerful corporations, and she was going to have front-row seats to the destruction. The war had officially begun. The story hit the financial markets like a nuclear bomb at 6 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Sarah Martinez's exclusive investigation, titled "The Blackstone Files: How Corporate Giants Manufacture Desperation," dominated every business news outlet within hours. Marcus sat in his cramped Queens apartment, watching CNBC's coverage with Emma perched beside him on his salvaged couch, both of them mesmerized by the unfolding chaos they had orchestrated. Blackstone Industries' stock has plummeted 37% in pre-market trading, the anchor reported, his voice tight with excitement. The Financial Herald's bombshell investigation alleges systematic corporate fraud, market manipulation and bribery in the acquisition of Wellington Technologies. Federal investigators are already— Marcus's phone rang incessantly. Reporters, lawyers, former colleagues who'd ignored him for weeks, suddenly desperate to reconnect. Emma had insisted they ignore all calls until the initial media storm reached its peak. "Phase 1 complete," Emma said with satisfaction, making notes in her ever-present notebook. "Blackstone's credibility is destroyed, their stock is crashing, and every acquisition target they've been pursuing will now run for cover. This is incredible, Emma, but you know they'll retaliate. Harrison Mitchell doesn't lose quietly." As if summoned by his words, the apartment building's buzzer rang with sharp insistence. Marcus checked his security monitor and saw 3 men in expensive suits standing at his front door, unmistakably corporate lawyers. "Mr. Wellington," a voice crackled through the intercom. "This is Harrison Mitchell, General Counsel for Blackstone Industries. We need to discuss the stolen documents your associate leaked to the press." Emma moved to the window and peered down at the black SUVs lined up on the street. 6 vehicles, at least 15 people. They brought serious muscle. Marcus felt his heart rate spike. They can't legally force entry without a warrant. "They don't need to force entry," Emma said calmly, pulling out her phone. "Mr. Wellington, do you trust me completely?" "Emma, what are you— Do you trust me?" she repeated urgently. "Yes, but—" Emma dialed a number with practiced efficiency. "Ms. Martinez, this is Emma Rodriguez. Blackstone just arrived at Mr. Wellington's apartment with what looks like a private security team. I think you'll want to send photographers." "Yes, I'll keep the line open so you can record everything." She handed Marcus the phone, then walked to the intercom with the fearless stride of someone who had nothing to lose. "Mr. Mitchell," she said clearly, "this is Emma Rodriguez, Mr. Wellington's strategic consultant. I'm 8 years old, and I'm the person who exposed your criminal conspiracy to the world." The silence on the other end stretched for several seconds. "I want to speak with Marcus Wellington immediately." Mitchell's voice finally crackled back, tighter with barely controlled rage. "Mr. Wellington doesn't negotiate with criminals," Emma replied cheerfully. "But I'll make you a deal. You have exactly 60 seconds to remove your intimidation squad from this building before I call the police and report corporate harassment of a minor." The Financial Herald is recording this conversation, by the way. Smile for the cameras, Mr. Mitchell. Marcus watched through the window as photographers emerged from unmarked vans, clearly tipped off by Sarah Martinez. The Blackstone legal team found themselves surrounded by journalists documenting their heavy-handed tactics. Mitchell's voice returned, cold with fury. "This isn't over, little girl." Emma's response was delivered with the icy calm of a seasoned negotiator. "You're absolutely right, Mr. Mitchell. It's not over. It's just beginning. Tomorrow morning, phase 2 of my plan goes into effect. I suggest you use tonight to prepare your resignation letter." She disconnected the intercom and turned to Marcus with a triumphant smile. "And that, Mr. Wellington, is how you turn a threat into a public relations disaster. By tomorrow, every news outlet in America will be running stories about Blackstone Industries sending armed intimidation squads to threaten an 8-year-old girl." Marcus stared at her in amazement. "Phase 2? What's phase 2? Emma's smile turned predatory. "Tomorrow, we file the lawsuit that will give you back everything they stole. And then we start building the empire that will make Blackstone Industries look like a corner convenience store." Outside, The Blackstone vehicles retreated in humiliating defeat, followed by a parade of news vans, hungry for the next chapter of the story. The war was escalating exactly as Emma had planned. The federal courthouse in Lower Manhattan buzzed with unprecedented media attention as Marcus and Emma arrived for what legal experts were calling the most audacious corporate lawsuit of the decade. Emma wore her best dress, still clearly second-hand but pressed with military precision, and carried a briefcase that looked comically large in her small hands. David Chen met them at the courthouse steps, his expression a mixture of terror and exhilaration. "Marcus, the media circus is insane. Every major network has crews here. Blackstone brought 17 lawyers. How many did we bring?" Emma asked calmly. "3, counting myself." Emma smiled with quiet confidence. "Perfect. David facing Goliath always makes better television." Inside the courthouse, the gallery was packed with reporters, financial analysts, and curious observers drawn by the spectacle of an 8-year-old taking on corporate America. Judge Patricia Hendricks, a no-nonsense jurist with 30 years on the bench, called the proceedings to order with visible skepticism about the circus atmosphere. Harrison Mitchell stood to address the court, his silver hair and $5,000 suit projecting corporate authority. "Your Honor, this frivolous lawsuit is based on stolen documents obtained through criminal trespass by a minor. We move for immediate dismissal." Emma tugged on David's sleeve and whispered something urgently. David nodded and rose to respond. "Your Honor, our evidence was obtained by a child who observed criminal activity and reported it to appropriate authorities." "The whistleblower protection statutes." "Objection," Mitchell interrupted smoothly. 8-year-olds cannot be legal whistleblowers. This child lacks the capacity to understand the significance of the documents she allegedly found. Judge Hendricks looked directly at Emma, who had been sitting quietly beside Marcus, with the composed attention of someone following complex legal arguments. "Young lady, do you understand why you're in this courtroom today?" Emma stood with perfect posture, her voice clear and confident. "Yes, Your Honor. We're here because Blackstone Industries committed fraud when they acquired Mr. Wellington's company. They hid the fact that federal investigators were examining their business practices. They manipulated market conditions to force a desperate sale. And they bribed corporate insiders to pressure Mr. Wellington into signing a contract he couldn't properly evaluate." The courtroom fell completely silent. Judge Hendricks leaned forward with sharp interest. "And how do you know these things, Miss Rodriguez?" "Because I was present when they discussed their illegal activities." "Your Honor, my mother cleans their offices and I heard them planning Mr. Wellington's destruction in detail. I also photocopied documents that prove everything I just described." Harrison Mitchell's face had gone pale. "Your Honor, we object to testimony from a minor who—" "Mr. Mitchell," Judge Hendricks interrupted coldly, "this child appears to understand the issues better than half the lawyers in my courtroom." "Continue, Miss Rodriguez." Emma pulled documents from her briefcase with practiced efficiency. "Your Honor, these internal Blackstone memos prove they knew about the FTC investigation 6 months before approaching Mr. Wellington. They deliberately concealed material information to induce fraudulent acceptance of their contract terms." Judge Hendricks examined the documents with growing amazement. "Miss Rodriguez, did you organize this evidence yourself?" "Yes, Your Honor. I've been studying corporate law and federal regulations for 3 years. Blackstone's fraud follows a clear pattern they've used against 12 other companies since 2019. Marcus watched the judge's expression shift from skepticism to fascination to barely concealed outrage as she reviewed Emma's evidence. The courtroom remained pin-drop silent, every person present witnessing legal history in the making. "Mr. Mitchell," Judge Hendricks said finally, "I'm scheduling an emergency hearing for tomorrow morning. Bring every executive who signed these memos. And Mr. Mitchell, I suggest you prepare explanations for what appears to be systematic corporate fraud." As they left the courthouse, Emma looked up at Marcus with quiet satisfaction. "Phase 3 complete. Tomorrow they start returning everything they stole from you." Marcus shook his head in wonder. Emma, I think you just became the youngest person in American history to expose a major corporate conspiracy. Emma's smile was fierce with triumph. And we're just getting started, Mr. Wellington, just getting started. The emergency hearing convened at 9 a.m. sharp, but the Blackstone Industries delegation looked like they'd been awake all night. Harrison Mitchell's usual corporate confidence had evaporated, replaced by the haunted expression of a man watching his career disintegrate in real time. Emma sat between Marcus and David Chen, her small notebook open and ready, looking like she was preparing for a particularly challenging final exam rather than the culmination of a billion-dollar legal battle. Judge Hendricks entered the courtroom with the purposeful stride of someone who'd spent the evening reviewing federal fraud statutes. Mr. Mitchell, I've had 14 hours to examine the evidence presented by Miss Rodriguez. I have questions. Mitchell stood unsteadily. Your Honor, we maintain that these documents were obtained illegally. Mr. Mitchell, the judge interrupted sharply. I'm less concerned with how these documents were obtained than with their contents. Specifically, I want explanations for the internal memo dated March 15th, detailing plans to create market instability around Wellington Technologies, and the payment authorization for $2.3 million to board member Richard Ashworth. The gallery buzzed with excitement as reporters frantically took notes. Emma watched Harrison Mitchell's composure crumble completely. Your Honor, that memo was taken out of context. What context makes corporate sabotage and bribery acceptable? Mr. Mitchell, Judge Hendricks' voice carried the cold authority of someone who'd presided over white-collar criminal cases for decades. Emma tugged David's sleeve again. Whispering urgently, David nodded and stood. Your Honor, we have additional evidence that came to light overnight. Miss Rodriguez discovered electronic communications between Blackstone executives and offshore accounts used to fund their market manipulation activities. Emma stood and addressed the court directly. Your Honor, I spent last night at the public library researching Blackstone's financial disclosures. Their SEC filings contain inconsistencies that suggest they've been using these same illegal tactics against multiple acquisition targets. Judge Hendricks stared at Emma with undisguised amazement. Miss Rodriguez, did you conduct this analysis yourself? Yes, Your Honor. I cross-referenced their quarterly reports with federal investigation timelines and found 17 separate instances where they concealed regulatory scrutiny during active acquisition negotiations. The courtroom erupted in whispered conversations as the full scope of Emma's discoveries became clear. She wasn't just exposing the Wellington Technologies fraud. She was revealing a systematic pattern of corporate criminality spanning years. Harrison Mitchell slumped in his chair like a man watching his entire world collapse. Judge Hendricks called for order, then delivered her ruling with crystal-clear precision. Based on the evidence presented, I find clear and convincing proof of fraudulent inducement, material concealment, and conspiracy to manipulate market conditions. The Blackstone Wellington Technologies acquisition contract is hereby declared null and void. All assets, patents, and corporate control are to be immediately returned to Mr. Wellington. Marcus felt his knees go weak with relief and disbelief. Emma simply smiled with quiet satisfaction, as if the outcome had never been in doubt. Furthermore, Judge Hendricks continued, I'm referring this matter to the Federal Bureau of Investigation for criminal prosecution. Mr. Mitchell, your clients have 48 hours to comply with asset restoration or face contempt of court charges. As they left the courthouse steps, Emma looked up at Marcus with the triumphant expression of someone who just changed the course of history. Phase 4 complete, she said calmly. Tomorrow, you start rebuilding your empire, and next week I start learning how to run it. Marcus laughed with pure joy for the first time in months. Emma, you've just pulled off the most spectacular corporate comeback in American business history. Emma's smile blazed with determination. Mr. Wellington, we haven't even started fighting yet. Wait until you see what I have planned for Phase 5. 6 months later, Marcus stood in his restored corner office on the 45th floor of the Wellington Technologies building, watching Emma explain advanced AI algorithms to a room full of MIT computer science professors via video conference. At 9 years old, she had become the youngest strategic consultant in corporate history and was already being courted by universities eager to study her unprecedented intellectual development. "The breakthrough isn't in the processing speed," Emma was saying, her child's voice carrying the authority of someone who'd revolutionized artificial intelligence theory. "It's in the ethical framework integration. Current AI systems lack contextual empathy protocols." Marcus shook his head in continued amazement. The past 6 months had been a whirlwind of impossible achievements. Wellington Technologies had not only recovered from the Blackstone attack, but had emerged stronger than ever. Emma's insights had led to 3 revolutionary patent applications, and their stock price had tripled as investors recognized they possessed something unprecedented, a genuine prodigy with business instincts that defied explanation. The door opened, and Maria Rodriguez entered carrying coffee and wearing the professional attire of Wellington Technologies' new Director of Operations, a position Emma had insisted her mother deserved after reviewing her Colombian engineering credentials. "How's our resident genius today?" Maria asked, watching her daughter casually solve problems that had stumped seasoned researchers for months. "She's planning to revolutionize 3 more industries before lunch," Marcus replied. "Yesterday, she suggested modifications to our supply chain that will save us $50 million annually. This morning, she designed a new employee benefits program that human resources called impossibly generous but mathematically sound." Emma finished her conference call and turned to them with the satisfied expression of someone who'd just taught calculus to kindergartners. "The MIT professors want to offer me early admission when I turn 12. I told them I'm too busy building an empire." Marcus laughed. The partnership that had begun in a pizza restaurant had transformed both their lives beyond recognition. Emma had kept her promise. She'd helped him reclaim everything Blackstone had stolen, and then elevated Wellington Technologies to heights he'd never imagined possible. "Speaking of building empires," Emma said, pulling out her ever-present notebook, "I've been thinking about our expansion into renewable energy technologies. I have some ideas about solar panel efficiency that could revolutionize the entire industry." Maria looked at Marcus with the bemused expression of a mother whose child regularly redefined the limits of human achievement. "Sometimes I wonder if she's actually my daughter or some kind of business-minded alien who decided to adopt me." Emma grinned with the pure joy of a child who'd found her calling. "Mama, you're stuck with me for at least 9 more years. By then, we'll own half of Fortune 500. Marcus gazed out at the Manhattan skyline, thinking about the impossible journey that had brought them here. A year ago, he'd been a broken billionaire eating cold pizza and contemplating bankruptcy. Today, he was the CEO of one of America's fastest-growing technology companies, guided by a 10-year-old strategic partner whose intellectual capabilities seemed to expand daily. "Emma," he said quietly, "do you ever miss being a normal kid? Playing with toys, watching cartoons, worrying about homework instead of corporate governance?" Emma considered the question seriously. "Mr. Wellington, some people are born to play with toys. Other people are born to build the companies that make the toys. I know exactly what I am." She walked to the window and looked out at the city, stretching endlessly below them. A city full of dreamers and schemers, winners and losers, all struggling to write their own stories of success and failure. "Besides," Emma added with a smile that held all the confidence in the world, "I'm not done yet. This is just the beginning. By the time I'm 18, Wellington Technologies is going to be the most powerful company on earth. And every little girl who gets told she's too young, too poor, or too different is going to know that impossible is just another word for hasn't been done yet." Marcus nodded, watching his extraordinary partner plan their extraordinary future. The 8-year-old girl who'd asked for pizza scraps had become the architect of the most remarkable corporate transformation in modern history. And she was absolutely right. They were just getting started. The empire Emma Rodriguez was building would reshape not just business, but the very definition of what was possible when brilliance met opportunity and refused to accept the limitations the world tried to impose. In the end, Marcus realized he hadn't just recovered from his billion-dollar mistake. He'd discovered that sometimes the most catastrophic failures create space for the most extraordinary successes. And sometimes salvation comes in the most unexpected packages, like a brilliant little girl who sees possibilities where everyone else sees only problems. Their story was far from over. In fact, Marcus suspected it was just beginning.